Well, good afternoon, and thanks first of all to the organizers for the opportunity to present here today. In my talk, I'm going to address the topic of secular stagnation with the main focus on its relevancy in light of the current euro area expansion. So, in this context, the two major questions are the concerns about secular stagnation in the euro area still valid? And to already preview the results, yes, they are, as a risk of secular stagnation in the euro area remains at this point. And secondly, in light of these findings, what are the implications for macroeconomic policy in this setting? Well, in general, the secular stagnation is in itself not a new concept. In fact, the initial secular stagnation hypothesis was already coined in 1937 by Hansen in light of the experience of the US economy following the Great Recession, and what it contained was a low growth, low interest rates scenario for the United States at this time. However, the secular stagnation hypothesis was revived in the aftermath of the Great Recession, given both the depth of the recessions as well as the initially weak recoveries in advanced economies. At present, in light of the current euro area expansion, these worries about secular stagnation voiced about 5 years ago may, at a first glance, appear to be overly pessimistic and yet even misplaced. But what are the causes of secular stagnation? When consulting the demand-side perspective on secular stagnation, the core is the secular decline in the natural rate of interest. On the graph on the right-hand side, you can see the evolution of the euro area natural rate following already starting from the 1970s until the current time. And what you can see is that it has been declining steadily. And however, this fall in the natural rate accelerated substantially in the course of the Great Recession and the euro area debt crisis. And according to the current estimate, the estimate which is presented here is the standard Holsten-Laubach-Williams estimate. The estimate has remained close to zero. As we've seen before, this estimate is subject to uncertainty. However, the general tendency of this development holds. And the demand-side perspective explains the fall in the natural rate of interest as a result of an oversupply of savings over investment in the economy, which depresses the natural rate of interest. What generates this excess savings vis-à-vis investments in the economy? From the demand-side perspective, those are structural factors such as population aging and inequality, which raises the savings rate in the economy, but also the recently observed decrease of the relative price of investment goods. The demand-side perspective on secular stagnation is complemented by the supply-side view, which puts the sustained decline in potential output growth at center stage. The chart on the right-hand side depicts the evolution of labor productivity growth in the euro area Big Four. And as you can see, productivity growth has been decreasing over a sustained period of time. And importantly, it decelerated even further in the context of the recent crisis. From the supply-side pessimist's view, this observation can be attributed to the third industrial revolution having reached a phase of diminishing returns, in the sense that the initial ICT innovations brought about the major productivity gains in the form of widely available internet, web browsing, as well as email communication. However, in recent times, according to their view, these initial gains could not be met anymore. And obviously, the demand-side view and the supply-side view of secular stagnation are closely linked, because firstly, weak potential output growth will eventually also translate in depressed natural rate, and also via an inverse Say's law, saying that a prolonged phase of weak aggregate demand will eventually translate in also a lack of aggregate supply. With these observations in mind, and returning to the initial question, can we, given the current expansion in the euro area, conclude that these worries about secular stagnation expressed initially only represented a false alarm? Indeed, given growth in the euro area, these initial worries may appear to have been overly pessimistic at this point. However, when evaluating the secular stagnation argument in light of the recent expansion, it's important to note that secular stagnation does not exclude the possibility of upswings. Under secular stagnation, upswings are possible, however, they are increasingly likely to be fueled by financial speculation. The underlying channel here is that as the low interest rate environment encourages investors' risk-taking and search for lead, which eventually also renders financial crisis more likely. From the secular stagnation perspective, signs of secular stagnation were present already for many years, but were masked by excessive risk-taking and financial unsustainability, which were, from the proponents of secular stagnation's perspective, key in enabling these expansions in the first place. The most notable example in this context is the buildup of a major housing bubble preceding the Great Recession, which culminated in the most severe crisis in the post-war period. Hence, to be able to conclude that the recent concerns about secular stagnation only represented a false alarm, it is crucial that the prevailing expansion proves financially sustainable and also that it persists in advanced stages of monetary policy normalization. Relatedly, the hysteresis argument, which points out the long-lasting effects of severe crisis in the euro area, is often presented as a competing explanation to the secular stagnation view. However, these viewpoints are not, in fact, mutually exclusive. So the secular decline in the equilibrium real interest rate, as we have seen on the previous slides, and corresponding market-based interest rates is a long-term phenomenon, which also set in well before the Great Recession, and for that reason cannot only be interpreted as only being crisis-induced. And the same observation also applies to the slowdown in productivity, which already set in well before the Great Recession. In other words, secular stagnation focuses on the long term and explains long-term developments. The hysteresis view, in turn, shows that productivity is not only determined by long-term supply-side developments, but also fluctuates to a degree procyclically as the key drivers of technological progress, such as R&D and technology adoption, increase during upswings and fall during downturns. And as you can see in the chart here, innovation activity in the euro area as measured by R&D expenditures in the euro area 12 tend to fall substantially during recessions and increase in upswings. So as a result, productivity may decrease substantially in a downturn as productivity-enhancing investments are postponed to the future, which also can render recessions highly persistent due to the second round effect of the initial downturn also on productivity. Hence, hysteresis considerations can be particularly apt for explaining the acceleration of both the slowdown in productivity growth and the decline of the natural rate following the Great Recession, as well as for providing insights into the depth of the recession and the initial sluggishness of the recovery, and hence explains short to medium-term dynamics. While secular stagnation, on the other hand, as stated initially, is concerned with the long term and should be interpreted, and hence both theories should be interpreted as complementary rather than opposing views. What are the policy implications on the tendencies of secular stagnation? Secular stagnation does not mean that economies are going to remain in stagnation forever. Rather, secular stagnation means that it persists for as long as its major driving forces prevail. However, as we've seen previously, current estimates suggest that the natural rate of interest in the euro area has remained low and close to zero, and it does, at least at present, no signs of a drastic recent reversal are discernible at present. Similarly, productivity growth has also remained low. When turning to the main drivers of secular stagnation, such as the decrease in the relative price of investment goods, population aging, and the increase in inequality, those are all long-term, slow-moving factors, making an abrupt turning point unlikely at this point. Consequently, the current expansion in the euro area should be interpreted as a recovery from the persistent effects of the Great Recession and the sovereign debt crisis, and hence a medium-term phenomenon, while long-term interest rates remain at present low and bear the corresponding risk of secular stagnation. And this situation holds important implications for monetary policy. Firstly, because of the effective lower bound on nominal interest rates, the central bank's maneuver by means of lowering key policy rates is limited, and which leads, secondly, also to the fact that unconventional monetary measures may be needed more frequently in the future. Moreover, in the presence of a low equilibrium interest rate, it may be more difficult for monetary policy to reach its inflation target even when the zero lower bound is not binding, as economic agents may adjust their inflation expectation downwards. In light, a possible trigger could be that they reevaluate the long-term growth outlook of the economy, as well as another trigger could be the observation of a recent zero lower bound episode. In this setting, and given the general adverse effect attributed to secular stagnation, as well as the corresponding obstacles to monetary policy, it means that addressing the headwinds causing secular stagnation is key when designing adequate macroeconomic policies. In this light, growth-promoting policies are a promising avenue for policymaking as they seek to boost long-term potential growth through that individuals' future income prospects, rendering them, given that they're well-targeted, desirable from a welfare perspective. Importantly, this holds true irrespective of the presence of secular stagnation, which is a pivotal point in light of the uncertainty surrounding about the prevalence of secular stagnation at present. And this point makes them also a no-regret option for policymaking. Potential policy measures could be, for example, fostering education, which would also help in alleviating the potential disruptions from automation, as well as help including new technologies in production, as well as strengthening labor market participation and fostering innovation through research and development. As stated before, however, tendencies of secular stagnation only prevail for as long as their key driving forces persist. And one area which may hold very positive surprises in store is the area of technological progress, which may also have the capacity of reversing tendencies of secular stagnation altogether. In order to see this point, it's helpful to picture productivity growth as a two-stage process, which firstly starts with the initial invention of new technologies through research and development, and which is secondly followed by technological diffusion, that is the incorporation of these technologies in the actual production of firms. Hence, even though many important technology advances may have been realized in recent times, they will only exert an effect on output in a measurable form and also on productivity once firms utilize these technologies also in their production processes. A central example in this context which may hold potential sizable productivity gains in mind and in store, is the field of artificial intelligence. As you can see on the chart on the right-hand side, the evolution of patents in artificial intelligence and related innovation activity has been growing rapidly over the past decade and more. In other words, AI may represent, as did the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, and personal computers represent a general purpose technology, meaning that they have a high power of drastically boosting productivity. However, incorporating AI in production requires substantial changes on the firm level, meaning that this initial adjustment may first of all take time, and secondly be also attributed to substantial costs. Also, hysteresis effects matter in this context because, as stated previously, the crisis in the euro area may also have likely to have affected the evolution of productivity adversely, as productivity-enhancing investments may have been postponed to the future. As a result, productivity may improve substantially in the context of the current expansion, as sound overall economic conditions may foster innovation through increased R&D activity and technology adoption. And an important point in this context is also that these procyclical productivity improvements may further have the capacity to support the ongoing recovery in a self-reinforcing manner, meaning through a positive feedback mechanism between sound economic conditions on the one hand and productivity gains on the other hand. To conclude, at present, a risk of secular stagnation remains in the euro area, because firstly, secular stagnation does not exclude the possibility of upswings, so the current euro area expansion does not per se render the secular stagnation argument void. Crucially, under secular stagnations, upswings are also subject to financial risk, rendering key if the current expansion also proves financially sustainable and will remain sound in advanced stages of monetary policy normalization. In general, there is still a risk of secular stagnation in the euro area, firstly because current productivity growth and estimates of the natural rate remain low, and secondly, as the structural drivers remain at this point, such as aging, remain at this point broadly unchanged. However, and on a positive note, recent innovations may have the potential of reverting tendencies of secular stagnation. Further, aptly designed macroeconomic policies can help in reducing the risk of secular stagnation. In this, policies boosting potential output growth represent a no-regret policy option, as they are, given that they're efficiently designed, economically beneficial, irrespective if the risk of secular stagnation is going to materialize or not. And importantly, they help to alleviate the constraints on monetary policy in this setting. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. So I think Mihail just gave a very clear overview of the secular stagnation hypothesis and different issues related to it. So I'm trying to just sort of complement Mihail's presentation by discussing some of the possible sort of policy conclusions here. But let me first say that I fully agree with Mihail in that I believe that secular stagnation, or at least the conditions for secular stagnation, are sort of likely to stay with us, at least for some time, but possibly for the indefinite future, right? So the main reason why I think this is the case is actually the fact that we have seen a very very steady secular, if we want, decline in the long-term real interest rates. So actually, I think it's if you look at the actual interest rate adjusted for inflation, this pattern is even clearer or more visible than when one looks at the estimated natural rate, which is what Mihail just showed you. So if you think about the long-term government bonds of very low-risk countries, the real interest rates or real yield on those bonds is down from around 5% a year in the mid-1980s to around 0 today. So that's actually a huge decline. And importantly, the rates were already low relative to recent history before the financial crisis. So this doesn't have much to do with unconventional monetary policies. So therefore, I think there's little reason, in my opinion, to assume that these rates would increase substantially anytime soon. I mean, they might, who knows? But I just don't I don't see any reason why that would be the case. At the very least, we cannot count on that, I would say, right? Related to this, I mean, I think it's a bit. I think we should stop referring to the current rates as somehow abnormal. They are just, I think, they might very well be the new normal. Actually, I think recent research has shown that if you look at the more distant history of past, we have seen rates this low also before. So it's not clear that there's anything abnormal about the current rates. So we perhaps better get used to them. Now, low interest rates per se, I would say, are not a good thing or bad thing. They're just prices. We just kind of take them as given. But the main problem is that they make the zero lower bound or the effective lower bound, if you want, more likely to be binding. And a related concern is as Mihaila also referred to, is financial stability. So, some policy issues that I want to discuss briefly. Okay, the first, I would like to, first I would say that, the zero low band really has, or the effective low band, it really has the potential to create huge distortions. I would hate, say, rent regulation. We shouldn't regulate rents, for instance. That's what, in my view, would be a huge distortion in the economy. Zero low band arguably is even a bigger distortion. It causes even bigger problems. And in my mind, this justifies all sorts of unconventional monetary policies, including the actions taken by the ECB since the financial crisis or the euro crisis. But arguably, the long-term goal should really be to eliminate the zero low band altogether. So I would like to see central bankers having more power than what they currently have. So I think we need a more open, really a public debate about the idea of eliminating paper currency. So at some point, I think we should start explaining to the wider audience that the promise of paying zero interest rate on cash is, under current conditions, a very problematic and costly promise. And we shouldn't stick to that forever. And therefore, arguably, we need to eliminate paper currency and have something else instead. For sure, in the meantime, I also think that yes, we should explore alternative monetary policy regimes. I also tend to think that the price level targeting, perhaps precisely the kind of asymmetric price level targeting, is the most, well, at least the most promising or the interesting alternative. And Mihaila mentions that, okay, one, kind of no regret policy option would be to try to boost productivity. Okay, so how would we actually do that? We could think about maybe subsidizing private R&D even more than what we do currently. Alternatively, we could invest more in public infrastructure, right? Now, think again about the huge decline in the low interest, in the real low-risk interest rate. It has gone down from something like 5% annually to around 0 today. So for sure, if you do standard cost-benefit analysis of different various potential public infrastructure projects, it should be the case that there are many projects that seemed ridiculously expensive a couple of decades ago with interest rates around 5% annually, that currently should look very lucrative, right? With an interest rate, say, of 1% or something like that. So presumably, in the face of this sharp decline in long-term real interest rates, we should indeed be investing much more in public infrastructure, assuming we didn't kind of dramatically invest in the past, right? So what's the problem? I don't think we are investing that much more in public infrastructure right now, actually. Why is that the case? I actually think that one possibility is that government they just don't react to these changes in the discount rate, in the proper discount rate. I think that's a possibility. And it would be a problem if that is the case. Interest rates go down, and then an important actor, the government in this case, doesn't really react to that. Of course, there are very relevant concerns related to fiscal sustainability, also fiscal rules, which in some cases, may prevent even sort of a, very wise or highly productive infrastructure projects being undertaken. One potential solution here would be to try to, more carefully separate public investments from consumption when applying fiscal rules, for instance. Another possible concern is, of course, the uncertainty about future interest rates. We don't know. It might be the case that the interest rates will increase sometime in the future. The solution to this should be obvious, though. Just issue very long-term bonds. Finland, for instance, I think doesn't issue very long-term bonds. Okay, and finally, I wanted to comment briefly about macroprudential policies. I actually think that we should, rethink current policies to some extent. So the problem is obvious, I think. We are living in a very low interest rate. Okay, now I'm also saying that these are very low interest. We are living in the new normal, with interest rates much lower than what they used to be. And it's pretty clear that this implies that the price of land in good location, which is always in scarce supply, goes up. As a result, house prices in many areas, not everywhere, but in many areas in city centers at least, go up. And as a result, household leverage tends to go up as well. So, and this is kind of risky situation. I fully agree with that assessment. So I think the main problem is that we are in a situation where, house prices are high relative to household income. Household leverage is high, so as a result, relatively small changes in house prices can result in large changes in household net worth relative to household income. And this is destabilizing in many ways. So the current policy response to this seems to be that just tighten household borrowing constraints. Now, I think it's okay to require households to put some equity when buying their house, or require me as some down payment when buying a house. I think that's fine, but there are limits, really, I think, in how far we can go with this policy. So one problem here is that we should be very worried about household welfare. So borrowing constraints, obviously, at least if you think about rational households, they distort the life cycle consumption profiles. So they lower household welfare. That's, in my mind, is a very, very bad thing. There are distributional issues here. Like if you impose very tight borrowing constraints, then arguably you benefit those with inherited wealth who have the down payment to make. And then I think more fundamentally, this policy is sort of it's a bit odd to respond to lower interest rates by forcing households to save more. At the same time, we are kind of a little bit worried about this situation. The interest rates are so low. Well, here we have a policy where we force households to save more, so presumably this in general equilibrium is going to work to going to lower the equilibrium interest rate even more. A much more efficient way, in my view, would simply be to increase property taxes on land to lower house prices. The problem is that house prices are high relative to income. Just use taxes. Taxes are typically more efficient than this type of quantity constraints, right? Now, I know I'm fully aware that central bankers do not like to think about or talk about taxes, at least not publicly, and I was referring to property taxes here. But I would say, that's kind of nature of the problem. It's very hard to tackle these, the problems that we have with secular stagnation. It's very hard to tackle them efficiently simply by using, the standard monetary policy tools. So it's at least as long as we don't really get rid of the zero low bound, right? So I think it's inevitable that we need to we need to think about new tools here as well. Thank you.
Mihaela, please. Would you like to start by addressing a few of the points Nico made?
Well, thanks a lot for the very interesting comments. In general, I agree with most of the points. In general, in a broad perspective, especially, I think it's important, as that you pointed out, that it may be that, due to some external structural factors, it may be the case that in a couple of years, the risk of secular stagnation turns out to not be here anymore, that interest rates may evolve, long-term interest rates may evolve in a different direction. However, it's important to note that we shouldn't count on it, and I think that's an important point. And also to be ready to think of other issues along these lines. Also related to the public infrastructure investments, in general, I guess it's important that you pointed out that also that it's also endogenous in a sense that it may be now in the current times, those may be in an environment of low interest rates, this may be more desirable than ever as the opportunity costs have decreased. And also at the same time, they would obviously promote aggregate demand at present while boosting potential growth in the future, so would be beneficial for various reasons. About macroprudential policies, I guess that's also, if it turns out that secular stagnation remains to be a topic also for the future, I think this is also a very important topic along these lines. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And now, please, any comments from the audience? Please.
Yes. The fact that there should be, or there could be, maybe more investment in infrastructure to counteract a bit the diminishing output or whatever has been a debate in the last year or 2 years or so, and particularly with the Juncker plan. One of the ideas, if I understand well, of the Commission would say, well, there won't be so much of a fiscal issue because we can take out of the budget the parts that's for the infrastructure. Nevertheless, there has not been, or it seems there has not been much enthusiasm, despite the fact that everybody seems to agree it's needed, that in fact we have not seen, correct me if I'm wrong, as much infrastructure investment as was expected, at least, by the original Juncker plan. Maybe I'm wrong in my analysis, but could you comment a bit on this? Because this has been an issue in the past 2 years or so in the European Union, and yet we are maybe not seeing concerted effort on that. So that was my question, in fact.
Thank you. Please, Mihaela, if you start.
Well, in general, I guess in the context of secular stagnation, also the type of infrastructure investment matters. So it should be well targeted in the sense that it also is in the end efficient in increasing potential output growth. That is one thing. And then also, I guess, what matters is also the degree of fiscal space in countries. So this is obviously also a hurdle for this type of policies against secular stagnation in this current setting.
Thank you.
So I think you addressed that to me as well, maybe because of my previous responsibilities, and I'm happy to carry some responsibility on the capital increase of the European Investment Bank, which took place in 2012-13. It's already expanded its lending capacity, and it was further increased in 2014-15 when the Juncker plan was introduced. In fact, the lending capacity was around 60 billion by the time it was expanded to 180 billion, and then the Juncker plan to over 300 billion euros. I have not frankly seen recent statistics of the use of say, EIB funding and other elements from the funds related to, or national funds related to the Europe Bank. But my impression is that say, based on more overall anecdotal observation is that it has been overall used in infrastructure and research and development investment. But I think you are right that the member states have not, for one reason or another, they have not made very much use of the exception or qualification that you can subtract your investment in line with this EU investment plan from your fiscal balance, fiscal deficit. So that's one reason why the Commission has kept on recommending further increased investment in public infrastructure for many member states, especially for the surplus countries of the euro area. Of course, as Michael said, within the frame of the fiscal space. So in a way, it boils down to the question of quality of public finances and how you can reallocate resources for private R&D or public infrastructure investments, which are, to my mind, proven to be essential for advancing productivity growth and long-term economic growth in the European economies.
Thanks. And then we have Tuomas first and then Aki.
Thank you. As one of the hosts, I don't dare comment on Mikaela's excellent presentation. But as I'm also responsible for cash here at the bank, I probably need to comment on Niku's comments. Well, first, I totally agree that zero low bond can be a huge problem for the society and the economy and the central bank. However, if the real interest rate or the neutral interest rate has declined, and the problem is that there is a limit for nominal interest rates, I would have guessed that your first suggestion would have been raise the inflation target, but maybe you didn't dare to do it as we are in a central bank. You said that ZLB, one of the problems is related to financial stability. Also, if you got rid of cash by creating central bank digital currency, it could create huge financial stability issues, because whenever uncertainties increase, all deposits go into central banks, and that's a huge problem for banks. So it's not a silver bullet, at least. On your comments on macro issues, I would say that you said that at the central bank we don't dare talk about taxes, but we can talk about taxes. Certainly, taxes are more effective in controlling house prices than our tools. It's just that we don't have any responsibility or any role in setting the taxes. So it's the Ministry of Finance who does that. But it's not only taxes. Sure. I think we've been. I would say we've been. We've probably. Well, let's keep taxes. Let's go to subsidies. It's the same. Other side of the same. We do talk about subsidies on owner occupied housing, and it's the same as the other side of the same coin. So we do talk about these issues, and it's only also the town planning, or how you call kaavoitus in English. It's the subsidies, town planning, taxes. They are all extremely important for macro issues. You're totally right there.
Thank you. I would also like to comment on Niku's comments on elimination of tax of cash. My concern there is that if we get rid of cash, we would have no place to hide. So the privacy issue is important here as well. So if the big brother is monitoring us on all our purchases, I would be a little bit worried in times of democracy having problems and totalitarian societies rising. So elimination of cash try to be afraid of it, and yeah. But another point here is on infrastructure. Why do you suggest that we should increase public infrastructure spending? Why don't we just increase incentives for private investments?
Okay, if I may first get back to Tuomas briefly. So, because I'm happy that now we are actually discussing the idea of eliminating cash in a central bank. So, I'm aware of the problem that you mentioned. I would have thought that it would be relatively easy to tackle the problem, the stability issue, the problem that in a crisis atmosphere, everyone would just shift all their money to the central bank account, right? Surely we can limit the amount of money that people can have or individuals can have in if it's a central bank account. I don't know where it should be, but right, could be constrained, right? We shouldn't need that much cash, right? Okay, so I guess I'm not yet buying that should be a very, strong argument against the idea of eliminating cash, given the huge upside, which I think we agree that would really eliminate the zero low one. Okay, so well, there are financial constraints. The private investors, to some extent, I guess, private investors must have increased their investments in the face of lower interest rates. I was just thinking about, the most, straightforward policy responses. It's even more straightforward, I think, for the government to increase its own investment. We still need to do some public infrastructure investments anyways, right? So, but I take your point. For sure, yes, we could also think about somehow encouraging private investors. Why not? Yes, it would go, work to the same goal for sure.
Yeah, my actually worry was the politicians, that if we give politicians more money, they tend to spoil it or put it somewhere in wrong places.
You're very conservative now in many respects here. Also, about the privacy issue. Yes, that's one advantage of cash for some people. Also, you could also see it as a disadvantage because it helps criminal activities. Obviously, this anonymity of cash. So there's another trade-off here as well. Also, I would think that it should be possible. To create, to overcome also this privacy issue if
okay,
you really want.
I think cashless.
Okay, thank you. I stop here.
Yeah, cashless economy is the topic of another conference, and we've indeed had one last summer here summer before that here in Bank of Finland. Anyway, I would like to pose and abuse my powers as a chair. One question to Mihail, and this is a very short question because secular stagnation indeed is not my field of expertise. But what would be your estimate of reliability of production or productivity projections? Like, are you able to evaluate at all? Have there been any empirical research done on that field? And what I'm especially thinking that are we such an arrogant generation that we think that future generations wouldn't be able to innovate and create new things?
Well, to the last question, I guess in general it's about whether the current generation has been capable of generating sufficiently new innovations. And as I said also during the talk, it may not even be the main problem may not be the inventions, but also mainly also the technology diffusion in recent times. To the first question, is your point that
are we able to reliably forecast productivity growth?
Well, as opposed to the natural rate, productivity is an empirically observable variable, which obviously also is subject to estimation errors. but it of course also exceeds a bit the scope of the analysis I made, but at least in my judgment, I think they're widely reliable and also compiled via various sources, so I wouldn't see a major worry in this. But of course, like with mismeasurement, if it's related to digital technologies, has been proven to be an issue, but it is also shown not to be the major driving force of the productivity slowdown.
Okay. And final question before we break for coffee goes for the governor.
This is an easy one, and you can give a very short answer to this. And in fact, the answer was already underpinning your presentation. So if you have two ways of addressing or analyzing secular stagnation, you have, on the one hand, you have the demand side, which is underlined by Larry Summers, and then on the other hand, you have the supply side underlined by Robert Gordon. So where would you cite in identifying the main drivers, main factors of secular stagnation, if there is such? Are you more on the side of macroeconomics of Larry Summers or of technology productivity development of Robert Gordon?
That's obviously a difficult question. Like, first of all, as I said before, it's important that they're closely interlinked, as like low productivity growth also translates eventually also in a low interest rate environment. And on the other hand, if you have a sustained period of weak demand, it will also, in the end, via this inverse sales law, translate into weakness of supply. However, like in general, I think they're both complements in the sense that they're both important to consider. But like maybe the supply side view may have, as I also showed in the slide on artificial intelligence, maybe have more weaknesses in the sense that this argument may not be here to stay, as its underlying drivers may change over the time. For instance, when technology adoption picks up or when the effect of the recent technologies show their effect. But other than that, I would not necessarily dare to make a weighting of those both theories.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mihaela. Round of applause for Mihaela and Niku.